And we are live, Dodger. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So welcome everybody to a Zcash community call. My name is Jack Gavigan. I'm the Executive Director of the Zcash Foundation. And we're holding this call today to talk about some issues that have arisen around conflicts of interest and the ZOMG committee, the Zcash Open Major Grants Committee. These are some issues that arose fairly recently, and just to give a very high level summary, the advice that we've received is that sitting members of the Zcash Open Major Grants Committee may not receive funding from ZOMG whilst they are sitting on the committee, even if they recuse themselves from discussions about such grant applications. Now, this was new advice to us. It wasn't our previous understanding of what sort of restrictions or the ZOMG committee would be under. So we felt it was appropriate to pause the election process, because it was clear that this information may cause some people to reconsider their desire to stand as a candidate for election to ZOMG. And also we need to delve a bit further into it and tie down exactly what the situation is. But we wanted to have a chat with the community. We wanted to share this information with the community, and in particular with the current and prospective ZOMG committee members, in order to get some feedback, in order to hear some thoughts, in order to be able to answer some questions as best we can, without having to wait until we had all the information available. Now, from our side at the foundation, the sort of investigation into this stuff has been conducted by our relatively recently hired COO, Alex Bornstein. We hired Alex because he has a tremendous amount of experience in the governmental and nonprofit space. And as a result, he's the best person to explain what information has come to light, what advice we've received, and what the implications are. So I'm going to throw it to Alex.
Thanks, Jack. Happy to be here to explain this stuff. And I'm going to try my best to not go into a huge amount of detail, but provide enough so there's an understanding of why we are where we are right now. And then we can talk about potential next steps. And so to start off, can ZOMG members be elected while they have an open grant? The guidance, the latest guidance is, if a ZOMG member is elected with an open grant, they can continue working on the project that led to that grant. But, and this is a change from what we posted because the guidance has been updated, they cannot continue to receive payments arising from the initial grant, nor can they receive new grants while serving. They can receive payments for the work completed after their ZOMG term is completed. So basically, if you have an existing grant, you could be elected to serve on the committee, but we would not be able to make milestone payments to you for that open grant during the time that you're serving. Once you finished your service, we could catch up and make those milestone payments. Why is this the case? Why can't ZOMG members with open grants receive payments or request new grants while serving? So this is all down to the concept of inurement, which grants would inure to the benefit of ZOMG members while they are serving on the ZOMG committee. They may propose grants for other individuals or entities, but not for themselves. So the concept here that we're having to understand and address is inurement. So without getting into a very long discussion about this, the basic definition of inurement is the IRS has a non-distribution constraint, and it's embodied in the prohibition against inurement. And inurement is basically a different term for benefit. And what it does is prohibit or forbid the use of income or assets of a tax-exempt organization like ZF to directly or indirectly unduly benefit an individual or other person that has a close relationship with ZF. Basically, it's an insider having a benefit that other people wouldn't have. And so the goal of inurement prohibitions is to prevent the siphoning off of an exempt organization's assets by insiders, those in control of the organization, or have a role that controls a significant portion of the organization, like in the case of ZOMG, where they are approving or rejecting, grants that total up into the millions of dollars. So the really important thing about inurement, for a nonprofit, it is an absolute restriction, meaning that if we violate this prohibition, then our tax exempt status would be in danger, in grave danger. So it's an area where every nonprofit has to be extremely clear in how we're looking at conflict of interest and how we're managing these insider relationships. So potential consequences, like I mentioned, loss of charitable status. There's organizational or personal sanctions depending on the prohibition that's been breached. So to be clear, it's not just potential consequence for ZF as an organization. There are some personal potential consequences as well. Again, depending on what the breach is, what the action was that led to the inurement. And then under Virginia law, specific Virginia statute, where our office is technically located, there is also a potential loss of personal liability protections for individuals because of the potential conflicting interest that's involved. So again, the prohibitions that we're talking about are both to protect ZF and all of the individuals that are a part of this, a part of these activities. And the other thing I want to make clear, there is a big difference. These actions are not illegal. They are prohibited by statute. So we're not talking about criminal issues here, unless criminal activity was to occur, which now we're talking about. We're talking about consequences for individuals, monetary consequences potentially, and then status and potentially monetary consequences for ZF. So that's the very kind of high level overview of why our council and why these conversations are happening and what they're based in, what the foundation is. Jack?
Yeah, so I want to just preempt some obvious questions. The first one being, well, why didn't we know about this before? And I think that the simple answer to that is that the possibility of a sitting ZOMG committee member applying for a grant hadn't really come up before. You can argue that it's something that we should have anticipated, but it just hadn't come up before. As soon as that question arose, Alex sought advice on the foundation's behalf, and that's why we're now in this position. I also want to reiterate that the sort of restrictions that Alex has described are the most conservative or restrictive interpretation of these rules. Now, it may be that as we explore them further with lawyers and get to discuss the details, it may be that the end result is something that's slightly less restrictive. But what Alex has described is what we fear may be the most conservative interpretation of these rules. And as a result, as I said before, we wanted to talk with the community about this, to get some feedback, particularly from prospective candidates like Aditya, who are currently receiving grants, and also from other members of the or potential members of the committee and existing members of ZOMG, just to get some feedback, to hear your thoughts, and also to answer some questions, and to hear any ideas that that people might have. And just to throw out a couple of things, one of the things that we've proposed recently was in response to Chris Bernitzky's proposal that we have staggered elections in order to avoid wholesale turnover, once a year when the ZOMG committee's terms are up for renewal. So one of the idea that I proposed is that some of the new ZOMG committee stand down after 6 months, and we hold another election to replace those people on the committee, and that way we'd be able to start off a process of having staggered elections. And one of the possibilities, for people who are interested in applying for grants at some point in the future, but not necessarily within the next 6 to 8 months, would be for them to stand, be elected to ZOMG if the community decides to elect them, but then to stand down after that 6 month period, as part of that, kicking off that whole staggered election process. And that way they'd be able to contribute to ZOMG for a period of time, and then step down in order to be able to apply for grants and whatnot. The other thing I want to put forward or suggest is that the reason that we're interested, and I think that the community is interested in having people on ZOMG who are likely to apply for grants, is because they have a fair amount of expertise, they have a fair amount of knowledge that will be very, very useful when it comes to assessing grant applications. Another way of accessing that expertise is by issuing RFIs, which is something that we've been working with the ZOMG committee over the past few weeks on putting together some templates for RFPs and RFIs. I'll let Alex again talk a bit about that. But essentially, this is a process whereby the ZOMG committee could choose to effectively hire as independent contractors external people who have relevant expertise or knowledge in order to be able to provide the ZOMG committee with the benefit of that expertise and knowledge, and also get compensated for their time, but without those people having to actually be members of ZOMG. And Alex, I'll let you explain a little bit more about that.
Right. So the purpose behind the RFI process, the RFI process, the idea is to create an expert roster of individuals and potentially companies that could provide that expert support to ZOMG. And that support could be in the form of helping write statement of work documents for requests for proposal processes, but or to help evaluate grant requests or milestone payments. So making sure that we have a mechanism, a ready mechanism to tap into this amazing expertise that's out there that's required to support ZOMG's work. So what we'd be looking at in the very near future, weeks to months, looking at creating this expert list through an RFI process, and then ZOMG being able to tap into that list when necessary for discrete projects based on an individual's expertise. The RFP process, which is related, is a mechanism whereby ZOMG can identify a project that they want to get grantee proposals for, and then be able to secure, expertise to create whatever the app is, or whatever that project, whatever the desired project is. So the RFI and RFP process work closely together. But the RFI process really does allow for us to tap into that expertise in the community, compensate for it, and provide the support that ZOMG needs to fulfill their mission as well. So to be clear, the RFI process and that expert roster is happening. That's going to happen very shortly, regardless of how this all works out. But it's directly related because it does allow for that engagement without compromising, a developer's livelihood or other things that they have going on. So it is a fairly, it's a good solution for two separate potential issues.
Yeah, and it also taught like the part of the impetus behind the RP and RFI process was some of the feedback that we received from ZOMG about a desire to be able to access resources to be able to carry out effectively specific pieces of work or to provide advice and expertise to ZOMG without being constrained by the resources and knowledge and expertise that only exists within the foundation. So I also want to say that this constraint or this restriction is arising because ZOMG is under the administrative umbrella and is part of the Zcash Foundation. And it may it may cause people to think, well, what's the benefit of having it under the foundation if it's going to face all these restrictions? Well, the reasons that the reason that these restrictions are there are to protect the funds that are held by the Zcash Foundation. We are effectively regulated by the IRS. We are subject to specific rules. With as Alex has described, sanctions that can get applied for breaking those rules. And what that means is that the ZOMG's funds are very well protected. It means that I can't decide to suddenly abscond with them off to Brazil. There's a very strong level of protection there, ensuring that those funds are spent on the specific purpose for which they were donated to the foundation. So there are those strong protections, but as part of those strong protections, we unfortunately face these sort of restrictions. So regarding next steps, we're going to continue exploring this. We're going to talk more with lawyers, and I'm sure everybody knows how frustrating that can be sometimes. We think that it's likely, and in fact, I think one or two have already expressed this sentiment, that if these restrictions do, in fact, turn out to be what we're faced with having to deal with, it's likely that some of the candidates who had announced that they were interested in standing and running for ZOMG may decide to withdraw their candidacy. In which case, I think it would be appropriate to reopen nominations to allow other people to put themselves forward as candidates. But the main reason that we organized this call was to talk to the community, talk specifically to existing and prospective members of the ZOMG committee, and hear some feedback, answer any questions. And really, have a bit of a discussion before we start making any decisions on what we do going forward. So please use the raise hands function to indicate that you wish to talk. I will also keep an eye on the chat for any questions from the audience. Aditya.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So it's Addy here, and I do have a couple of points to raise. So first, I want to start by saying that I do support Zcash Foundation in keeping up with the legal framework within the jurisdictions ZF is incorporated in, right? And secondly, I think we are having an intense focus on conflicts of interest, but we are like totally ignoring the angle of a possible 100% alignment of interest when a ZOMG member can be in charge of proposing funding for well-aligned grants. So apart from that, two issues I want to raise with today's Alex statements. The first one being is something new I heard again, and that is that even if you do have payments coming in, the ZOMG potential candidates will not receive milestone payments. So that information was not present on the blog post made by ZF. It only said that members may not submit a grant proposal while sitting on a ZOMG under any circumstance. So That's one point I would like to bring up. And the second point for Alex was about ZF being incorporated in Virginia, but the forum post said it was incorporated in Delaware. So which one is it?
Yeah. So we are incorporated in Delaware with a Virginia address, mailing address, which means that we have to comply with both sets of regulations. Delaware has minimal regulations, so we primarily concern ourselves with Virginia. So yeah, I should have made that clear. Thank you for mentioning that. And then to your first point, the revision and guidance is due to additional back and forth between us and our legal counsel, and this was a further clarification, which again is going to lead us to further explore additional opinions and further clarification.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that at the moment this is an evolving news story, as it were. But rather than wait until we had everything wrapped up with a nice little bow, we wanted to get out there and talk to the community about it. But yeah, it's certainly evolving, and things may change further. Like I say, I think that the situation that Alex has described is likely to be the most conservative or restrictive end of the scale. If we're lucky, it won't be that restrictive, but that remains to be seen.
Understood, and thanks for clarifying that. So just follow up to that is that in respect to the current limitations of ZOMG, how it's set up under ZF, what is the stance of ZF be open to reconsider the organization of ZOMG, the independent body?
I think our approach with our policy with regards to ZOMG is that we are enacting the will of the community as expressed in ZIP 1014. So if the community decides that they want ZOMG to be an independent entity, then of course we will facilitate that. But what I would say is that no matter even if ZOMG were its own 501c3, they would face the exact same restrictions. Like this isn't the case. That this isn't a situation that's unique to the Zcash Foundation. It's applicable. It applies to most nonprofit, most if not all. And Alex would be the expert in this, so I'll throw it to him in a second. To most if not all nonprofit organizations. So even if ZMG were its own separate organization, they would still face these constraints. It also applies in other jurisdictions globally, because we've, in light of recent discussions, we have been looking at what sort of regulatory restrictions would be faced by an organization like ZOMG and various restrictions. And Alex, I think you'd in light of this restriction, you'd looked at the rules in Switzerland.
Yeah, so I have the benefit or the privilege really over the years of working around the world for nonprofits, including starting up several in Europe and in Switzerland, one or two. So their conflict of interest rules around the world are very similar for nonprofits. There are some nuances, but really you're trading, in some cases, some jurisdictions, you're trading some freedom for less freedom, let's say, on your financial assets or transfer of assets or use of assets. Like there's always a trade-off everywhere you look. And so I wouldn't say that what we face as being a US-based nonprofit is overly restrictive globally, but there are certainly some restrictions. But regardless, anywhere we compare it against, for traditional, to make it clear, for traditionally set up nonprofits, then we'd be looking at similar restrictions or less restriction, but a trade-off for restrictions elsewhere within the work we're doing.
And again, I think it's worth reiterating that these restrictions are there to protect they're there to protect the funds that have been donated to the organization. So in the case of the Zcash Foundation and ZOMG, the Zcash Foundation receives a slice of the dev fund that is declared in ZIP 1014 to be effectively an unrestricted donation, i.e. the foundation can use it to do all the stuff that we normally do, building Zebra, running Zcon, running the forums, all that sort of stuff. And we also receive and administer the ZOMG slice of the dev fund, but that is a restricted donation which can only be used for the purposes that are set forth in ZIP 1014. And those restrictions, you know, the nature of our status as a 501c3 means that, as I said, I am restricted from taking those funds and spending them on a staff retreat at an expensive hotel, or on creating some kind of you know, special bonus scheme for all the senior executives in the Zcash Foundation. There are these benefits and protections that attach to this status, but like I said, there is this flip side. There's a question that was posed by Justin, which he asks: can the ZOMG issue grants to entities that are affiliated with Zcash Foundation board members? Now, I think there that the question is what type of affiliation it is, and whether the board member in question is a direct beneficiary of those funds. And I also don't know if you want to say anything on that.
Nope, that's accurate.
Aditya, while we're waiting to see if anybody else wants to raise their hand, sorry, Adi, would, you know, if it turns out these are in fact the restrictions that are going to be in place, would that change your mind with regards to how would it affect your decision regarding standing for ZOMG?
So about that, someone from the forums did post that there could be a period of cooling down, like we don't have to have continuous income for grants, and the fact that there could be a possibility of a 6-month stint on ZOMG. So I might be interested in that.
Yeah, that idea of having a 6-month period after which people could stand down was actually a kind of a workaround to make it possible to have staggered elections, where a portion of the committee gets elected every 6 months rather than the whole committee getting re-elected every November. But yeah, in this instance, you know, it could be a situation where somebody could stand, serve, not receive any funds for the duration of that period during which they're serving, and then stand down and be able to then you know, either continue receiving funds for a pre-existing grant, or apply for a new grant. Brian.
Hey everyone. So there's been some discussion on the forums lately about creation of a DAO, either independently separate from the existing organizations, or maybe potentially trying to use ZOMG to kind of bootstrap in a small way a new DAO. So I'm curious if we're also taking that into consideration as well. You know, as a member, as a ZOMG member, there's a possibility that one of those members would potentially want to participate in a DAO. And then what question does that raise as well?
Well, I think that if even if a DAO were to be created, and if the community were to be satisfied that it was secure and fit for purpose enough to receive funds, I don't think that would happen in the short term. You know, I can't see it happening within the next few months, and we're really focused on the short term. I think in the longer term, you know, there's going to be ongoing discussions about ZIP 1014 and how and whether we want to change it as a community. And you know, when those discussions progress, you know, we'll be taking part in them, and putting questions to the Zcash Community Advisory Panel as appropriate. But right now, what we're focused on is the sort of short term, figuring out what to do literally in the coming weeks regarding ZOMG. The existing committee's term is first term is up in November. So we need to we need to have a plan for moving forward beyond that. So that's really what we're focused on. I think discussions about it. I'm a big fan of DAOs. I think from my perspective, my expectation is that it's unlikely that one could be ready to have a meaningful impact on the situation that we're currently faced with.
Yeah, those are great points. It just came up in discussion on the forum, so I figured it. It's in the back of my mind. I'm sure it's in the back of others' minds as well. And we're talking about a 1-year term here, so potentially a 1-year term if you don't want to do 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. My suggestion is that people should draw straws or whatever after 4 months, say, to see who would step down. But if it turns out that there are people who specifically only want to serve for 6 months, then I think that's a good way of achieving the same end result. I'm interested in hearing from other either Hudson or other specific other prospective candidates for ZOMG.
Sure. So real quick, Harry Halpin had a comment in the chat that basically says, is there a link to the conflict of interest rules between the ZF board and ZOMG, or ZF employees and ZOMG? I don't remember where one is. I know it's been talked about.
So there's there is a conflict of interest policy in the bylaws of the foundation that applies to the Zcash Foundation board. And what it says is that if the board is discussing any subject where a member of the board has a financial interest, then that person must recuse themselves from those discussions. But effectively, what we're talking about here are rules, as Alex described them, statutory rules that they're not internal to the Zcash Foundation. They are imposed on all 501c3 organizations. So we're talking here more about rules that are regarding inurement that are Alex, off the top of your head, do you know who is the organization that sets those or has set them in the past?
It's there are IRS rules, and there's also multiple states have specific rules that sit under those as well. So we look at IRS and then we look at state.
With that, it looks like we are going to be publishing ZF is going to be publishing some COI rules. I think they posted in the chat. And Jack, you mentioned if some of the other panelists had words. I have a few things. One of them is that I've kind of been reflecting and from talking to others on, some of the back and forth we've had on the forums and stuff like that between ZOMG and ZF. I kind of wanted to give everyone my perspective on the situation as it is today. I think there is still some unclear conflicts or tension between ZF and certain ZOMG members. At times, it's also been kind of hard to parse that because when you're on ZOMG, it's not your full-time job. So you're not always involved in it. Definitely the hours are going to be increasing as I think Jack or someone put it on the forum to an expectation of 15 hours a month. But in general, the biggest reasons we're running into some of these problems and conflicts is that ZOMG was formed as MGRC at a time when there was a lot of turnover at the Zcash Foundation, in my opinion, with Josh Cincinnati leaving as executive director and then Anthony leaving. There was a lot of institutional knowledge that left with that. And also, and then bringing in new team, and the fact that ZF is a much smaller team than other like people like the ECC and stuff like that, there just wasn't the support necessary there to help the ZOMG as it was intended. So although there was all the intention in the world to bring support to ZOMG and provide us with resources to keep up with milestones of grants and respond quicker on the forums and stuff like that, and maybe do more outreach and expert help, that just didn't happen. So that's not to blame anyone. It's just the timing of circumstances. And so I think now that time has passed and we have people like Jack and Alex taking a strong stance and supporting ZOMG, I think it's good that we're starting to get that support. And I think that's going to continue. So I'm confident on that. At the same time, on the flip side, I guess, there has been some calls to make ZOMG independent. My thinking would be the earliest at all that could start to happen is a year from now. And that's like, if that's like a priority for everyone, because there's so much behind the scenes that goes into this grant making or grant giving stuff from a legal perspective, from treasury management to, contacting all the different teams who are getting grants and conflict of interest statements and setting up a legal entity and having lawyers, then amending the ZIP to actually provide self-funding. So if I was like complete dictator over everything, I'd probably look toward writing down on the form the most pressing issues, that being some of the things that have been discussed that could be really quick wins, like having staggered elections or like staggered people on seats for ZOMG, and maybe some other rules to 1014 that were less clear, because it's not the end of the world to amend it a few different times over the next however long as things change and improve. And if the price of Zcash or ZEC goes to $1 versus if it goes to $8,000, that's going to be a big difference in the scope. Like if ZEC goes to if like the treasury gets to where we have, hundreds of millions of dollars, like the Ethereum Foundation treasury, we can't have just a 5-member committee and a couple of helpers. Like it would have to be bigger. But that's all kind of future looking for them. In the meantime, I'm curious to hear what other panelists think in their mind from seeing the forum posts and stuff, the biggest immediate concerns that could be quick wins.
I just want to interject quickly and say I totally agree with your characterization of what's happened, and I think that in recent weeks we've had we had a great meeting a few weeks back where we between ZF and ZOMG and we thrust through some of these things, the issues that Chris raised on the forums, things like increasing the expected time commitment, increasing the compensation commensurate with that increased time commitment, looking at ways to enable ZOMG to be able to have to be able to go out and to effectively hire expertise, be able to get advice, better support from the foundation. We announced a few months ago that we were looking to hire a communications and ecosystems relations manager person, and what we did was we ended up splitting that role in two and hiring two people. One person focused on as head of communications, and Decentralist Dan, who's sitting quietly in the audience on this call, who's just started last Friday and who is going to be leading that ecosystem relations function, a large portion of which will include supporting ZOMG. So I think, absolutely, I with hindsight, I would have done these things quicker, but it's hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I like to think that we're making good progress at the moment. And Hudson, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from the sentiment on that call a few weeks ago, and to be clear, not all of ZOMG was on that call, but the majority were. I think was positive and constructive, and I feel like we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I would say so. Granted, I mean, there are going to always be some disagreements, and I mean, as far as I know, none of the other ZOMG members are rerunning, so that's also going to cause a little bit of a lot of pressure on their part to feel like they're leaving this better than when they came in, which was, I guess, the start. But you know what I mean. Basically, not just leaving it in a place where they feel like it's not good. So their passion behind some of the statements they've made, I think, is good. And like should be recognized, especially people like Michelle, who've really been advocates for a lot of major changes that she believes should be happening to ZOMG that I think has gained some ground.
Yeah, and I think, just to highlight that when you guys started this, a little under a year ago, there was no ZOMG. It was starting from literally from scratch. So I think there's been a huge amount of progress in that respect. And I think that it's natural to expect something like this to evolve over time.
Yeah, and I was going to mention, so earlier I'd asked panelists, like, is there anything, because like the other thing I noticed is like the time that information takes to get from like ZOMG private chats or like ZOMG even public like note-taken chats back to the forums. And then also times for us to all go on and reply, sometimes weeks apart, make things complicated. Was there anything from a ZOMG perspective that you feel like I could, take comment on or anything like that? Any of the panelists or prospective members?
Ryan.
Yeah, I think personally, I think that the communication, the type of communication has been good. I'm excited. I mentioned in the latest ZOMG meeting minutes that I was excited to see Decentralized Dan join, because I have seen that sort of delayed communication, and I'm expecting that will improve. But I'm not pounding the table. I know that things are in the works, and his position has been in the works for a little while. So, I think we're making the right changes that need to be made. And I'm optimistic that communication will flow smoother in the future and a little bit faster. I don't necessarily have anything additional to add to that, though. As an outside observer, I think the minutes have been detailed pretty well. And I'm satisfied from that perspective. I think other people on the forums have also made similar comments.
Yeah, that's all Danica and Sean for the most part, who do the editing on those. We do look them over from time to time, but they're the note-taking heroes.
Yeah, definitely appreciate them.
So who hasn't spoken? Jason and Michael, you guys have been very quiet. Would either of you like to provide some feedback or thoughts on this stuff? Michael.
Hey, for sure. I'll jump in. I got a question for you. And I think that something that would really benefit the ZOMG in general would be for it to be taken more seriously as a job. We had 5 very mission-oriented and highly principled members for this first year, and we should thank our lucky stars that was the case. But in as much as there's a huge amount of money in flux, I would be interested in your thought process, Jack. I believe Chris's suggestion was 4 times the hours, 4 times the compensation, and even that to me seems pretty small given the money involved. How did you arrive at 1,500? What was your thought process there?
So we had that starting point, as you mentioned, of Chris talking about quadrupling it, and then we hired our head of communications, and we explained to ZOMG that we were hiring Dan, although he wouldn't be starting for a few more weeks at the time that we had that meeting, and we had a discussion about what would be an appropriate level of time commitment And again, Hudson, correct me if I'm remembering any of this incorrectly, but there was the kind of consensus that we reached was that 15 hours a month would be appropriate, and that was based on estimates by existing members, who have spent varying amounts of time on ZOMG over the past year or so, and also the expectation of what sort of support. So since Alex came on board, he's been taking the lead on providing that sort of point of contact with the foundation for ZOMG, fielding support requests. He's been working on these RPs and RFIs, templates and whatnot, primarily because of time zone issues. Right now here for me, it's nearly 10 p.m. at night. The ZOMG calls take place at 1 a.m. So it just didn't work for me to be able to attend them on any kind of regular basis. But now, the communications, effectively reaching out, publicizing the work of ZOMG, making sure that as wide a constituency of potential grant applicants are aware that there are grants available. That's now falls within the remit of our new head of communications, Winfred, and we've also hired Dan to provide a lot more support, to ZOMG, particularly with regards to providing that single point of contact for the grant applicants, and then being able to take some of the stuff off the ZOMG committee members' hands, so that they can be focused on really, making those decisions and not having to do all the work that surrounds it. I think there's some people have talked about making the ZOMG committee seats a sort of full-time job. I personally, and this is my personal view, not the foundation's view, but I personally think that if we were to do that, we would lose a lot of potentially very good candidates. So, if you look at the existing committee, people like Hudson, people like Chris, I think they have sort of, their day career within the crypto industry. And I'm not sure if they would be willing to put that on hold for a year. And bear in mind that this wouldn't be this could only be, it might only be for 1 year and then come to an end if they were voted, if they weren't reelected. So I think that, the original model, I think, as discussed during the process that led to ZIP 1014, was of having a group of part-time people who had various levels of expertise or standing or knowledge or experience within the crypto space. I could then bring that knowledge and expertise to bear on being able to assess grants and grant applicants. So that's to my mind, that's the model as I perceive it. And I think if we were to start having full-time people, that's really essentially what the foundation is. Having full-time people who have expertise, of one form or another. I have the expertise. I have the background in Zcash. Alex has the background in 501c3s, nonprofit governance. So that's effectively what the foundation is. So yeah, there's different models, but I think the one that the community had in mind when they drafted ZIP 1014 was very much a part-time thing. And I'll be clear, as I was with ZOMG. My goal is that 15 hours should hopefully decrease. My goal is that we take, the non-value add, from the ZOMG committee members' perspectives, work off their hands. We take care of that, but we leave the decision making to them. The key, to my mind, the key point of having ZOMG as a committee that is elected by the community is that they're independent. That they're not being influenced by what the foundation wants, not being influenced by what ECC wants. They're independent, and they can and they're effectively held accountable to the community. So that's where that's my perspective on it. But like I said, the foundation is here to serve the community within the obvious sort of legal and regulatory constraints. So if it emerges that the community have changed their mind and want to pursue a different approach, which is a perfectly, I think, reasonable thing for the community to do, then we're perfectly happy to facilitate that as well.
Sure. I appreciate you sharing your thought process. I hope you're right, and that things are slick this time around. That's outstanding. I will add, as a grant recipient and a prospective member, I think I should weigh in on the restrictions around grant recipients being paid. Alex is probably totally right about the compliance issues. I think, compliance aside, it's just a credibility nightmare if people are paying themselves, right? It's just a bad look. I don't think the community could survive something like that. So I just want to say, I think that's definitely best to just keep that out of the game.
And would if this set of restrictions that we described does turn out to in the end be the case, how would that impact your decision to run to stand as a candidate?
I still feel sort of weird about grants in general, because I feel like they pin down my creative process on my Blue Sky project. So I haven't been crazy about having them in general. So I'm thankfully very mission oriented, exceedingly principled. I would be thrilled to still be on ZOMG. And I'm even such a sport and so helpful that if someone needs to step down in 6 to help this staggered election thing happen, I might be the guy. So yeah, I'm still game.
That's good to hear. Looks like Jason's dropped off. We are coming up in an hour, so maybe that people are a bit bored of this whole topic. Harry, I think we're restricted from being able to. I don't know if we can we voice Harry?
Whoever's the organizer of the event should be able to bring Harry in.
There we
I just allowed him to talk.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm on my phone right now, so no video. Just a quick note. I mean, I didn't get. I did just ask in the chat because I thought it might be just on a publicly available link somewhere, but I didn't see it. I do think it would be useful to clarify the relationship between ZF members and employees who ask for grants, who are affiliated either as board of member or an employee or whatever with an organization which gets a grant. So that's definitely happened a few times. There's been no it's not clear there's any rules. It seems the rule is, if ZF has to make a decision, they have to recuse themselves. But I think, if it didn't seem to be the question of how ZF kind of funds its own directors or employees via ZOMG grants, or how their conflict of interest works, has been sufficiently detailed. I think it's good. I mean, I think a lot of ZF employees and directors are great people. They have affiliations with other great privacy projects that should be funded. But I do think, just in the interest of fairness, it would be really good just to clarify that somewhere. I don't think that amendment is sufficient or really addresses the question, really, because the amendment only applies kind of ZF internal grants. Not clear how it applies to ZOMG, and these are kind of slightly different things. So just like to see that clarified, and if you have any thoughts on that.
So I think so. First of all, the foundation may not receive, cannot receive grants from or cannot spend any of the ZOMG restricted funds. With regards to ZF board members or employees receiving ZOMG grants, that would trigger, I think, all sorts of conflicts of interest, red flags that we'd end up having to look at. With regards to affiliation, if so, the current conflict of interest policy that applies to the ZF board is detailed in the bylaws, and that is that if there is a if there is any form of financial interest, then the board member has to recuse themselves from those discussions and vote. And the ZIP 1014 specifies that same approach, that same policy must apply to situations where ZOMG committee members are looking at a grant that would go to an organization to which they are affiliated, or have a financial interest. I think what the stuff that we're talking about here is it's imposed from outside the foundation. It's not an internal policy that we're just coming up with. It's something that's being imposed, and in the text, in the chat, I posted a link to an IRS document which talks a bit about inurement and conflict of interest. And I think that may be useful in terms of providing some background. But if I don't know if you can talk about any specifics. I think the key difference or a key aspect here is whether funds, whether they flow eventually into the pocket of the person in question, versus whether they flow, like, for example, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head. So Harry, I don't know if you have any specific examples that you have in mind.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, let's just do a hypothetical to keep everyone happy. Let's say I'm a ZF employee. I'm on the board member of, I'm also a board member of Tezos. And I apply to ZOMG to give Tezos a grant. It seems to be that because the ZF doesn't make that decision, there's essentially no restrictions and no recusals there, just to make sure that's like the correct interpretation.
So you would have to disclose the conflict, but in this example, that is a large organization and you aren't doing the work. You're not the individual doing the work. You're suggesting somebody you're affiliated with, is the best recipient. And so in that case, you would disclose the connection, and then you would recuse yourself from the conversation. That's okay. That's been clarified by the attorney. The difference is if you owned a significant portion of that organization, if it was a for-profit, there's plenty of other scenarios within that would make that, even if you disclose the conflict, it would then not be okay. But exactly what you just described would be fine as long as the potential conflict is publicly disclosed based on the policy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would say that is, yeah, I mean, it's very standard recusal. I do want to point out that is not for anyone who's interested in nonprofits, that's not exactly the tightest policy, nor above and beyond anything legally necessary.
Yeah, I'd say it's average. Like there's a path there that is ethically and regulatorily okay. But yeah, it's certainly not the most restrictive view of it. And if I could just make two other quick points based on what you were saying, Harry. I think this is an opportunity for us. Every year we have an external audit, which is actually going on right this second. It's extremely detailed, probably one of the most detailed I've ever been a part of in my fairly long career doing this stuff. So that's a huge positive for us and for the community. And they look at all of these different things, conflict of interest, policies, and all of our actions, and on and on. And so here's a great opportunity for us to clarify and make sure everything is as it should be, and to the best of, to the highest extent possible. So I mean, I definitely look at this as somebody with an operations background as an opportunity just to be sure we're doing everything right and it's all clear. And so, like you mentioned, I think in the chat, clarity, I couldn't agree more. And as much as we can share with the community to educate a bit, because this stuff's confusing and it's contradictory sometimes. We will absolutely, I can pledge personally and on behalf of ZF, we're going to do our best to explain and be as transparent as possible. And so again, this is an opportunity to do all that. And it's unfortunate it kind of came at the last second, but I think it's better to look at it as an opportunity rather than a major roadblock we can't overcome, because that's certainly not the case.
I think it's actually, whilst it's unfortunate that it came, and it came as quite suddenly, and came quite late in the schedule for ZOMG elections. At least it came before the elections took place, because I think it would have been very, very unfortunate if people had been elected and then we're told, oh, by the way, you can't apply for grants while you're sitting on ZOMG, or can't even receive milestone payouts while you're sitting on ZOMG. So yeah, it's definitely not ideal. It's absolutely not something that we wanted to happen. And there's been some very deep discussions with lawyers, and there will continue to be while we figure out exactly what the policy needs to be. And I would just reiterate that this is about first of all, it's about protecting the Zcash Foundation and thereby protecting the assets that it holds, having been donated by the Zcash community, and it's also about making sure that we don't leave ourselves open to any sort of adverse action, which organizations who take a dim view of Zcash and the values that it espouses might use a situation like this to try to target the foundation. So we are our approach, our attitude here is that we're seeking to protect the foundation and Zcash as a whole. We have this operating model where we have the dev fund, and those funds flow to certain organizations for specific purposes, and our goal is to preserve and protect that model as expressed by the community, as by the will and the consensus of the Zcash community. Well, we're a little bit over an hour, but I want to give just a moment to see if anybody else wants to chime in with any last minute comments. And if you do, just raise your hand there in Zoom. But I think from our perspective, I think our next steps are going to be we're going to continue tying down the details of these restrictions. We'll I think unless there are any objections from the group here who think differently, I'm certainly minded that when the time is right, we'll reopen nominations for candidacy to ZOMG and give us an opportunity to just reset that. And if people want to withdraw as candidates, they can do so. Or even if they say that they would like to stand, but only then serve for 6 months, as part of that whole process to kick off the staggered elections thing. And then once we've got that clarity, and once we've given people an opportunity to declare candidacy or declare the withdrawals, then we'll figure out exactly what the timeline is for the election going forward. But it might not be the clearest, the most solid plan, but I think we're dealing with the situation with changing circumstances, and like I said, we wanted to have this discussion. We wanted to put this information out there and to get some feedback earlier rather than waiting until we had everything locked down. So I haven't seen any hands go up. So on that basis, I am going to bring this meeting to a close. And what we will do is we will post updates on the forum, and also keep an eye on our blog for further updates on this topic. I'd like to thank you all for attending. Let's thank those who spoke and contributed, and I'll see you all on the forums, I guess.
Thanks, Jack. Bye, everyone.
Cheerio.
Thanks, everyone.